Okay, evening all. A guy named Jake Johnson has a YouTube channel. He's also on Rumble. His channel is called Untethered Live. He's a musician. He's an awesome guitar player. And he's also a good Christian. Sometimes he does Bible studies. Sometimes he does. He'll the band wants to do a song and he'll just play the song and he'll pick through it and he'll figure it out. But he's a good guy. He's down to earth. He's somebody you should probably, if you had a similar like mindset than me, you probably ought to check out Untethered Live. And I will in the comments I'll put a link to him. But tonight somehow on his live chat, one thing led to another, and I mentioned waking up at the morgue, and the people that were on the live chat were like, "How the hell did you wake up at the morgue?" So I started typing, and it was way too long, and the message wouldn't go up. So anyway, I said I would do a video. Here's a video on how I ended up waking up at a morgue. And it's a funny story. And it goes to prove that no good deeds go unpunished. So my brother John was turning 17. He wanted a Jeep, and so my dad goes to the Jeep dealer and he finds I think it was like a 1983 this Jeep CJ7 with the 6-cylinder, 4-speed with the hard top and the soft top. Beautiful little truck. Some guy had it, and I don't know what happened, but it ended up back at the dealership. Excuse me for coughing. We're dealing with all that smoke from Canada right now. So anyway, he buys a Jeep. My brother drives it, and my brother Bob is a year younger. So last year of high school, John and Bob are both sharing this thing, and then they go off to college. And they come home in the summer, and they beat the crap out of the thing. And that thing went off-road, that went sideways, that went into trees, that got flipped over a few times. I mean, that Jeep had a really rough couple of years. So meanwhile, I'm older. I'm a couple of years older than my brother John, the older one. And I'm working, I'm doing my thing. And I go to the house one day when they're both in college. My younger sister, Sarah's about to get her driver's license. And she's basically she's sitting on the side of the driveway crying. And I was like, "What's the matter?" She's like, "Well, I'm about to get my driver's license." And I'm like, "Okay, that's a good thing." She's like, "No, it's not. I'm going to get my driver's license, but I got to drive the Jeep." And I was like, "Oh, Jeeps are cool, It's got the soft top, it's got the hard top, it's 4-wheel drive, it's cool, everybody drives them, everybody loves them, it's cool, what's wrong with that?" She's like, "Have you seen it?" And I actually said, "No, I haven't looked at that thing in a long time." So I looked at it. We walk up and look at it, and the passenger side is completely like folded over. The fender's crunched. The tires are. Everything was wrong with this. The fiberglass roof was cracked. The windows, every window was broken. The back window, I think it was like a plastic bag taped over it or something. The inside smelled like, an armpit of somebody who just, I don't know, hadn't showered in a month. I mean, this thing was bad. I mean, it was maybe 5, 6 years old. And man, this thing was a disaster. And went to start it. It wouldn't start. It kind of sputtered. It tried to start, but it didn't fucking run. Tires were all shot. You could see the rims were all fucking bent. I mean, this thing had been through hell and back. And where I was working at the time, it was a pretty long drive. It was probably at least 50 miles each way. And I was driving this big old Suburban that got crappy gas mileage. So I made a deal with my dad that, I'd drive the Jeep, get the Jeep working, and then drive it, and then put the gas savings into the Jeep and put it back together. So when my sister got her license, she had something decent to drive. And he was like, that's fine. So I got the thing running smooth. Then I put a new carburetor on it. full tune-up, new carburetor. It was leaking that oil all over the freaking place. It was new valve cover, new head valve cover gaskets, new intake manifold gaskets. I think a water pump. I think I replaced a radiator. I mean, it was a lot of mechanical work just to get the thing running, where I could drive it 50 miles and back. 50-mile round trip and make it. And then bought a new fiberglass roof for it, and then put all the new glass in it. Bent the body back into shape, repainted the whole thing, new wheels, new tires. I went through the whole thing. And when it was done, it was great. So my sister gets her license. She had her permit, and I took her out and taught her how to drive it. And we went up to this housing development. It was in the fall. Her birthday's in the fall, so we went up, and I taught her how to drive it by basically doing burnouts and wet leaves until she got the hang of the clutch. And she got her driver's license. She loved that thing. And the one thing I told her was, either I work on it or a friend of mine who's got a garage works on it. But we're the only one that works on it, because if somebody screws it up, it's on her. And she wound up meeting some guy, and he worked at a gas station. He's like, oh, you got to, do this and this and this and this. She told me, and I was like, either tell me what's wrong with it and I'll fix it for free, or bring it to Mike and I'll pay him to fix it and it'll still be for free. But if you bring it someplace else, it's on you. Well, she liked this guy, so she brought it down there. And when he got done with it, the thing was leaking oil all over the place, and then it caught on fire. And I kept telling her, bring it back to this guy, make him fix it. And she didn't do it, and eventually it leaked so much oil all over the exhaust that it caught on fire. So we put it out, but those years Jeeps had 1 million vacuum hoses on it, and it wasn't right. So Mike ended up working on it, and he got it 99%, but it still had a real dead spot in it. So he tells me to drive it around and, switch these vacuum hoses around, and, when you get it right, it's done. And so I'm driving it, and just like a pop-up really bad thunderstorm, and I'm driving down a highway, and somebody cuts me off. And so I go from the middle lane to the right lane, hit a huge puddle and hydroplane, and just started spinning in circles. And I did about 2 or 3 loops before I hit a curb, and hit the curb on the side of the road, and that flipped the Jeep over on its side, on the driver's side, into a guardrail. And not wearing a seatbelt, I flew through the fiberglass roof and landed about 10, 15 feet away. And the entire driver's side of the roll bar, the roof, the windshield, everything was crushed flat. So if I was wearing a seatbelt, I'd be dead. And I land, and I hit so hard that my shoes, I was wearing the old Docksiders that were cool in the 80s, and they got lost. I don't know where they went. But everything in the car was all over the place because the roof, disintegrated. And so one shoe's laying right next to me, and it's pouring rain, and it was pouring rain. It started to stop by the time I woke up. And so I find one shoe, and I'm hopping around on one foot looking for my other shoe. And then, a cop stops, and a rescue squad guy stops. And they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. They're like, you don't look okay. And I'm like, I'm fine. They're like, no, you're in shock. And I'm like, no, I'm not in shock. And they're like, yeah, you're in shock. You're hopping around on one foot. And I was like, I only have one shoe. And it's raining, and it's wet, and it's all mud. And that's why I'm hopping around on one foot, because I only got one shoe. You want to help? Find my other goddamn shoe. And so long story short, I find my other shoe. I walk out of there. I pick up, whatever was important that flew out of the Jeep. They're like, well, we're going to have it towed. We're going to do this. I'm like, no, call this guy, a guy named Paul Mazer, who was a really great guy who has since died. And they're like, you want to go to the hospital? I'm like, no, I'm fine. They're like, no, you're not fine. You're pretty fucked up. You got to go to the hospital. And meanwhile, I'm not really in any pain. I'm all wet because it was pouring rain. And I'm not realizing that I'm all wet because my head's bleeding like hell, because I ripped my scalp wide open, and half of like from here over is all flopped down over my ear. And you go like this because it's raining and it's wet. I didn't realize I was covered with blood. So anyway, they're like, Paul shows up, and he's like, Davis, what the hell did you do this time? And I'm like, I told him. I was like, I don't know, this asshole cut me off, so I moved to that so it wouldn't crash, and this is what happened. He's like, yeah, those Jeeps are bad. So anyways, it's like, you going to the hospital? I'm like, no, I'm not going. He's like, look at, he walks me over to the mirror of his tow truck. He's like, look in the mirror. You tell me you don't need to go to the hospital. And I look, and I'm like, wow, that's really bad. And he's like, you go to the hospital. I'll take care of this mess. I'll talk to you tomorrow. You tell me where you want it. So I go to the hospital, and they say you got to go on the stretcher. But the stretcher is just basically a piece of plywood in this fucking podunk goddamn ambulance they put me in. So this big guy, shit, he was probably 6 foot, and he probably weighed 250. I'm laying on there. I'm strapped to this board, and it's basically just a moving van painted up like an ambulance with a couple lights on it. And so this big-ass guy just sits across my chest and grabs my neck, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, well, I got to stabilize your neck for the ride to the hospital. I was like, dude, I'm fine. Just get the fuck off me. And he's like, nope, this is the way it is. These are the rules. So this thing that was basically a moving van, every time I hit a bump, everything would bounce up, including this big fucking guy on top of me, grabbing my neck, and he'd pull my head up, and then when we'd land, he'd slam my head against the freaking floor. So by the time I got to the hospital, which was about 10 miles away, I had the worst headache I ever had. I just felt like I went 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. I mean, I was beat up. So they rolled me into the hospital. Apparently a lot of people crashed. It was pretty busy. And they put me on a cart, and they're putting lights in my eyes and everything. I feel like shit. I just got my freaking my lights knocked out by this big jerk off sitting on my chest, knocked my head against the floor. And but I was in okay shape, so they kind of put me to the side. The lights kind of hurt at that point because I had a crashing headache, so I just closed my eyes. And the next thing I know, somebody's like wheeling me down the hall, and they put me in observation, and they kept moving me from one place to another until at some point I said, can you put me someplace where the lights aren't not right under an overhead light because the light's bothering me. And then they rolled me into a room that was really cool, and it was really dark, and I was like, wow, this is great, Put me someplace where I'm, the light's not bothering me. I could just lay here and suffer by myself. I closed my eyes and kind of fell asleep, and then didn't realize I was there for 3 or 4 hours. And then somebody else got rolled in there. And literally I was just lying on a gurney, no blanket, nothing over my face, no nothing. And the guy's just like, well, who the hell rolled you in here? You should have, a sheet over your head or something. And he goes, and I was just like, hey, how much longer am I in observation? The guy pretty much jumped out of his skin. He's like, this is the morgue. You're supposed to be dead. So I scared the hell out of him. He goes scurrying out. He found some orderly found me. He's like, oh my God, we lost you. They brought me back in. They stitched my skull back together and told me if it hurts, take aspirin, sent me home. And anyway, that's how I ended up waking up in the morgue. So, good times. If it doesn't kill you and it makes somebody else laugh, it's probably a pretty good time after all. Y'all take care.